All right, morning. Flat Plane Fool here with another morning commute. I just participated in Alex Flores's talking shit yesterday. So he went through and, Alex is a really smart guy, has a lot of really great opinions, knows Coyote stuff like the back of his hand. But there's just some little things that when he got into the 7.3, and I get it, everybody's talking, acting like it's going to be a Ford LS motor that we can swap into everything. It's not going to be that easy. Ford's never made it really that easy. So, but the things I did want to kind of rebuttal against, and I'm not trying to pick a fight or anything like that, because Alex had a bunch of good points, and I just got a couple counterpoints. So, talking about the engine only making 450 horsepower at 7.3 liters, sizing your engine really doesn't make a difference. It's all about head flow and cam flow. So how good your head flows at a certain lift and duration, and what kind of lift and duration you're given that head is what determines your peak horsepower. Again, we're riding in a GT350, so if I were to put these heads on a much larger engine, it would die off before 8,000 RPM. It would still probably make about 525 horsepower, maybe a little bit more, because we're losing less power to spinning the engine and all the friction loss and all that other stuff. But the peak power would be the same. The peak torque would go through the roof because of where we moved it, and that's why that engine's 7.3 liters. Is in a tow vehicle, you want that 475 horsepower. Now, the flip side is that as good as that 475 horsepower is for towing, that is going to be a transmission killer for anybody who's drag racing. If you take a set of turbos and slap it on that 7.3, that engine's going to make so much torque, it's just going to break anything you put behind it. So there's a counterpoint to having that much torque. But just to rebuke a little of what Alex said, he's right. The Coyote is a better engine. It's better designed. Just wish it had a little bit more displacement available for us, and he even called that out. But if the 7.3 is a little bit smaller, and it should be, than the physically smaller than the Coyote and Voodoo, then it'll fit in more vehicles. That's the simpler explanation for everything. Is the Coyote doesn't fit in much. You try to do a 60s Mustang swap with a Coyote, and you got to redo the whole front suspension because the shock towers are in the way. You got to do like a Mustang 2 suspension swap, and then you have oddball front end, and so basically you either have to do a Mustang 2 suspension swap, or you got to swap to a more modern strut style Mustang front end to get that engine to fit in a classic car. So if this thing's narrow enough to fit in something like that, or another 60s car, it'll have its place in engine swaps. The other thing about it is, he's talking about the A460 that Ford started making again. Well, 460 actually is a decent motor, but they never made a really beefy block in anything. So if you want a beefy A460 block, you got to buy the $4,000 block straight from Ford, and you're $4,000 in the hole before you even get to any of the rest of the engine. And those engines are expensive. All the little pieces that add up, you end up in a $25,000 engine before you get anything powerful out of it. So my point being is that going through all the history that I'm aware of, I don't think there's ever been a mass-produced 4-bolt main, let alone 4-bolt and cross-bolted main, big block engine. That's what makes this 7.3 interesting to me and a lot of other people. This may be an engine that ends up being just a tank. It may make an LS look like a weak engine. I mean, the much larger bore spacing, depending on how thick they made the cylinder walls, that could make this engine a much stronger, much more durable engine than even the LQ9s and all that stuff that people are just tossing, 1,200 horsepower worth of turbos and fuel on stock. So that's what's got a couple of us interested. And then the fact that Ford keeps bringing up the fact the ring set, it has a lot of lessons that they learned from the EcoBoost engines. Turbo engines have a much different ring pack requirement than a naturally aspirated engine. So the fact that they keep saying that makes me wonder if they're hinting to the fact that they put, the top oil control ring is much further down on the piston to try to save some heat. And I understand the point of this is they're setting up the engine to be a very lean burning, very fuel efficient engine. So, and when they say that, the first thing I hear is this thing's gonna knock on purpose, because they're trying to keep it right on that threshold, the most efficient engine that it can be. So they're trying to peak cylinder pressure, they're trying to keep it right on, or maybe just slightly over knock threshold, because that's where peak power is made. So I'm wondering if the piston, the rod, all this stuff is actually made to just be constantly rattled. And that to me says that with a good tune from somebody like Alex, lean it or richen it out some, change the advance, back it off just a little bit, this engine may be able to run lots of boost without hurting anything, because it was designed to rattle. And I'm not sure about that. That's just these little things that I'm trying to pick up on. But going back to the cylinder head and the fact that it's push rod and that's dumb technology and old and all that kind of stuff, and he's right, yeah, it's old technology, but it works and it makes a smaller engine, and this engine's much lighter than it would be if it had a set of overhead cams on it. So it's got its place there. And again, going back to what I was saying before, it's the cam and the head flow that determines the overall horsepower of the engine. The displacement only decides where that horsepower is in the RPM range. So the point being is, these heads obviously flow enough to feed a Mustang. If they make 450 horsepower stock, they flow about what the dual overhead cam heads flow. Maybe not quite as much. Maybe there's a little bit more aggressive cam in there. I honestly doubt it though, because a torquey cam would be less aggressive. So my guess is it's got less lift, less duration, and still making the same amount of horsepower. So granted, the larger bore allows you to have much larger valves and other things like that. So I'm betting that those heads flow about the same as a 4-valve head with 2 valves. Which then leads me to the fact that if you toss the, if the geometry is right to toss a bigger cam in, you probably have to change valve springs at the very least or something like that. But I got a feeling this engine will probably be, swap a cam in and an intake that's appropriate for RPM. You may be in the 600 horsepower ballpark. Throw a set of turbos on it and you may be way into the high horsepower range. Now, obviously this is all speculation, so he's speculating one way, I'm speculating the other, and this engine could just be a giant turd. But the truth is that he brought up the V10 and what is it? I think they ended up calling it the Hurricane engine. No, they changed it from Hurricane to Boss engine, the 6.2. 6.2 still doesn't fit in anything, and it's got a cast iron crank. So nobody wants to start off with an engine that's going to require a $3,000 forged or billet crank just to hold any power at all. And then the V10 engine, nobody makes parts for it, nobody makes cams for it. It's just a random kind of engine that came out, and nobody really supported it in the aftermarket. So in that regard, why would you want that stuff? So anyway, that's what I got. Hope you guys have a good day. I'm gonna sign off here. All right, thanks. Bye.